Alright, how's it going, guys? It is Glake from the Avid Entries slash the Phantom Pages once again. Today we're going to be continuing more of the completion process. You have to excuse me because today my throat is just very irritated. I think it was the coffee that I had. My throat and my voice is very sensitive to literally anything that I eat or drink. Which is why I like doing these videos before I eat anything, but I did have a little something this morning, so yeah, keep that in mind. So anyway, today we're going to be doing part 3, reconciliation. This is a very long sort of part. There's no chapters in part 3 of in part 3 of this book. Oh, I'm sorry, I lied. There is a chapter, but it's very long, so I'm probably going to split this up into, I'm thinking probably 2 parts should be enough. I think it's about 20 pages long, and then it brings you right about to the end. I think this is probably the last, yeah, so it brings you straight to the end of the book. There's one more chapter at the very end, but it's very short, so we're going to probably split this up into 2 parts. I think once I hit 10 pages or so, really depends, yeah, maybe not even 10 pages in. Let me see here. Because it's split up into little sections. Yeah, I'll look at the time and just see where we're at, but I might even have to split this up into 3 parts, actually, now that I think about it. But yeah, we'll see here, we'll see. So let's start with, so let's just start with the first chapter and the first couple sections, I guess. This is chapter 9, Life-Changing Impact of the Completion Process. Oh, man. The people who work for me and with me know that helping individuals with PTSD is a particular passion of mine. So it came as no surprise when, in 2014, my assistant burst into the room to tell me about a veteran in England who had been working with the completion process in his own life. He had discovered so much success by using it himself that he had contacted our offices to ask for my permission to use the process with other veterans who were returning from war with PTSD. This was the first time I was made aware of Surgeon Steve Kloves. I contacted him to tell him that he not only had my blessing, but he also had my full support. During the months that followed, Steve and I consulted on occasion about the completion process, and he shared with me on a confidential basis some of the tremendous success that particular individuals he was working with were experiencing. It was then that his passion to use the process with other war veterans turned into a purpose. And I am pleased to share that he is now on a mission to expand this work even further. Meeting a man of action. I had the pleasure of meeting Steve and his family in person for the first time in London in August 2015. It felt like a dream come true for me to meet this man, who had independently begun working toward my original vision and was turning it into a reality. You may have noticed in your own life that whenever you develop a strong connection to someone before you see him or her, finally meeting him or her is a very emotional experience. As Steve and I sat down to tea, he leaned his cane against the wall, and when we smiled at one another, our smiles themselves said 1,000 words. At that moment, I simultaneously felt joy and sadness. Those of us who have been touched at our core by life-altering trauma carry a particular kind of grief that is like a stain. We come to believe that this stain is what makes us unlovable and ruined. We spend years trying to rub this stain out, and we recognize it instantly in others. But this stain, like a stain added to a pot before it is fired, is in fact a part of our matured beauty. It adds a certain depth to the feel of us. Sitting in front of Steve that day in August, I saw his stain. I could feel that he recognized my stain as well, and the relief that came as a result of that mirrored recognition was palpable. It brought us each the silent gift of both understanding and loyal camaraderie. Like me, he and his family have been called to do this healing work within the world, and millions of lives stand to benefit by it. Steve's story is a constant reminder to me that when we experience painful things, we rarely know why. We don't see how it fits into the bigger picture of life, and so we feel victimized by life itself. But if we have the patience to just put one foot in front of the other in the direction of healing, the why eventually reveals itself to us, and we suddenly see the bigger picture. So often it is beautiful, and I can tell you it was that day. And I can tell you it was that day. This chapter is about Steve's own story and other stories gathered from courageous people who have experienced the completion process firsthand. Like Steve, some of them have gone on to become facilitators, and others are enjoying aspects of renewed well-being and a zest for life that they never thought they would experience again. Surgeon Steve Clues has been quite public with his own story and has given me permission to use his name. Others who sent in personal stories have given similar permission, but most of them live more private lives, and in order to protect them and their families, I have chosen to change most of their real names and any identifying details for this book. The quotations, however, are in their own words, which I feel are helpful for understanding why people choose to practice this completion process in their lives. You can see the interesting and surprising ways it has helped them and others. From the front lines. Steve Clues served as a sergeant in the Royal Armoured Corps Cavalry for the British Armed Forces for 12 years, with a number of active tours in both well-known and remote theaters of operation. He also served as part of a specialized training unit that carried out duties of close protection. He knew as a young child that he wanted to be a soldier, and he joined the Army Cadet Force at age 12. As soon as he left school, he joined the British Army, enjoying the disciplined training and passing through basic training. I'm eternally grateful to him and the others for sharing their personal experiences. During 12 years of active military duty, Steve experienced many traumatic events. He admits that in the line of duty he had to take lives. Due to the situations he was placed in and the conditions at the time, Steve had no doubt in his mind that there was no alternative. He came very close to losing his own life, to the point where even his clothes and armor were damaged by shrapnel or bullets. He even witnessed close friends and colleagues killed, maimed, and seriously injured. After leaving the army, he took resettlement, retraining in IT, and it was a good match for him. Within a year, he became an MCSE, Microsoft Certified System Engineer, and he was employed as a systems administrator for a large company, but something was not right, and he just could not settle. There was a part of me missing. Also at the time, I was in a terrible relationship, and I could not settle into a family life, Steve recalls. I had an aggression inside of me that manifested as if I had a double personality. When triggered, this cold, calculating, and very dangerous person would just step in and take over. It was as if the real Steve, me, who was a rational and logical thinker with good social morals and etiquette, was completely taken over. I felt silenced or overridden completely by this other person who was so violent. Each time this aspect of his personality took over, it stole more and more of Steve's self-worth and self-control. He says it got to the stage where standing talking to someone, no matter what the situation, he could feel a rage growing inside him. He would suddenly feel adrenaline surging through his body, first feeling his jaw clench, then his shoulders tense, ready to strike out. I felt like I was going to seriously hurt them. I realized that things were wrong. This was not the real me, Steve explains. So I started to withdraw from social events and society to avoid any triggers and to not expose myself to an environment that could set this off. He left his job and the relationship he was in, and he contracted some guys he knew who were working in the circuit in the Arab states or close protection work, bodyguards. He knew this work would put him back in some extremely hostile and dangerous locations, but he hoped it would give him some sense of control again. trying to adjust to a normal life. This line of work was alright for a while, but after a few years, Steve wanted to return to the UK and settle down and finally make a home. However, within a few months, he found himself struggling yet again with his hypervigilant personality and overwhelming urges toward aggression and violence. He moved from one job to another and kept relocating, but still he was drawn to more volatile types of work, such as being a doorman at night and a store detective by day. Store detective, interesting. What is that? Despite his best efforts, he felt his violent side rise up to the point of almost killing someone, and it freaked him out. Even though he tried to keep himself very healthy and even had his own gym, he found that his overall health deteriorated, bringing with him a lot of pain, bowel problems, and sleep issues. He also suffered with type 2 diabetes and particularly nasty anxiety attacks. Then, around April 2013, he suddenly and dramatically faced an even more serious health challenge. He suffered from a minor stroke, followed by another stroke a few weeks later. But it was not just his health that Steve was worried about. He had lost his 8-year-old son about 3 years earlier to a brain tumor. At the funeral, Steve found that he could not show emotion or tears. Then over the next 2 years, both of Steve's parents died suddenly, and the same thing happened. Steve could not allow himself to grieve or show emotion. He knew it wasn't healthy to keep so much grief and anger trapped inside, but he just couldn't express his emotions. After the strokes, he felt even worse because he could no longer do the physical things he had been doing, and his health spiraled even further downward. During the next few months, he developed, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, and his diabetes suddenly required huge amounts of insulin to control. It was then that the underlying mental health issues and PTSD really struck him hard. I was diagnosed with severe anxiety and severe clinical depression, Steve recalls. I started to suffer with dissociation seizures on a frequent basis, which are like a fit of seizures but without the shaking. Afterwards, you don't even know if you remain conscious or not. In terms of physical medical problems, he realizes now that he was suffering from Gulf War syndrome. In the UK, the Ministry of Defense still doesn't officially acknowledge this syndrome, even though Steve has personally met many veterans who suffer from it, seeking some kind of solution. By this time, Steve says that his mental health was causing serious problems, and he still couldn't control his temper. The slightest thing would trigger him into a rage, and he often had no idea or conscious awareness of what the trigger was. Like many people in this situation, Steve tried various antidepressants, and he was referred to counseling and CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. Steve admits it did not go well, and he stopped going after just a few sessions. He felt like the counselors were patronizing him, pretending to understand him, and those professionals actually became triggers. It was a dark time, and Steve says, I felt like kicking the 7 bells of dirt out of them. Eventually, Steve became a prisoner in his own home, avoiding even looking out the front windows in fear of triggers. This lasted just over a year, during which he never went out, and he had to be personally supervised by his wife or a family member. He lost all self-worth and self-control and didn't even trust himself. One day he decided that there was only one way out, which was to commit suicide. He made several attempts, all of which failed. His lowest point came next. On my final attempt, I started to push a carving knife into my artery on my neck. I just glanced down, and my beloved dog was looking up at me, and I froze on the spot. He recalls with emotion, I failed again because of the look of my dog's face. Now I didn't even have the control to end my own life. As a last act of desperation, he sat down at his laptop and typed in, dealing with anxiety. Many typical websites popped up, but then he noticed one of my sites. It had a picture of a YouTube channel, and the topic I was speaking about dealt with the emotional body. Steve had no patience left to read anything, but since this was a video, he clicked on it and listened to me explain how the emotions work and how we deal with them, mostly in the wrong way. Steve says that he could hardly believe it. It was as if lights in my brain were switching on, he explains. She talked at a level I could connect with and understand and relate to. It was as if someone had come along and placed a jet wash in my head and cleared out all the garbage and allowed me to actually get an angle and understanding of what was really going on. For the rest of that week, he says, he was glued to YouTube, watching video after video. He recalls feeling such a sense of relief that he was finally starting to recover. Let's see where we're at here. Okay, we still got plenty of time. Feeling complete at long last. Steve is clear about why this approach to healing clicked for him. For me, the biggest breakthrough to recovery and healing was learning about how emotions work and learning about acceptance. For as long as I can remember in my adult life, I had been suppressing emotions. This is something that soldiers do as part of life, and they are not often even aware that they are doing it. As a soldier, you cannot show any emotion except one that is pure aggression in the face of adversity. It worked very well while serving, and I will say it saved my life on a lot of occasions. But the problem is when I left the Army. I found this simply does not fit in with civilian lifestyle. When he heard me explain online that emotions are messages that are delivered to make us aware of something, it finally made sense to him. The more he ignored those messages in his life and suppressed them over the years, the louder they shouted at him. Sure enough, those messages found other ways of making him listen, manifesting in other forms such as pain, stress, skin rashes, stomach disorders, and so on. Steve suddenly realized that he couldn't outrun or keep hiding from these messages. He couldn't fight them because they were in his own head and in his own mind. What would happen, he wondered, if he opened up and allowed them in? What if he truly listened to them? At first I was afraid of doing this, but what had I got to lose, he recalls thinking. Sure enough, it wasn't long until something outside triggered me. I sat down in a chair and felt the aggression. I really went into myself and really felt it. I allowed every physical feeling come through, and I identified with it. I allowed the feeling to rise up, and I felt as if I was dropping down a funnel into it. 1 second, my leg seriously fell asleep. This is why I don't cross my legs when I sit. I probably also really should have stretched because I just finished one other video, so... The exact opposite of what he had expected to happen happened. He says it was like he had passed through a tunnel and came out the other side. But that other side was calm and clear. The physical turmoil and emotional feelings passed, and he felt lighter, as if coming up for air after holding your breath underwater. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt in connection with my body and mind, and I was actually in control, he says. I could not believe at first how easy this had been after years of suppression tactics or distraction. All this time, all I had to do was actually listen and accept what my emotions were trying to say to me. After a few days of the initial process, my world changed completely. Life was in front of me, and now I could take it on with open arms. I felt strong, and my energy levels were rising rapidly. Steve realized that if this had worked for him, then he could use it to help others. He was one of the first person to become a CPCP, Completion Process Certified Practitioner. You could find more details about the certification in Appendix B. As Steve says, I started to deliver the completion process to veterans who are in crisis, and every veteran I have worked with has found it to be the answer they needed. I watch as a whole aura of the person changes. Their posture suddenly changes, and their facial expressions, especially around the eyebrows, suddenly relaxes, fists unclench. As I bring them out again when they are ready, they look at me with relief. I ask them to not talk for a few minutes and just absorb how they feel, because I know firsthand it can be hard to put into words. I have been successful fully delivering the completion process for a year now. I firmly believe it's time to expand this process so that anyone can get relief so they desperately need to change their lives for good. One of the reasons the completion process works for Steve and his fellow veterans is that it allows us to become less reactive. The post-traumatic stress response goes away, even though you may not have faced war. You have quite likely faced trauma, and this process can benefit you in the same way. As you practice the process, you will find that triggers will no longer plague you. Once you begin to heal the wounds buried in your subconscious mind, you become free of sore spots. As a result, the people you come in contact with won't trigger you in the ways they once did. What a feeling of freedom is to realize that something would have infuriated you before no longer bothers you. You can begin to respond in thoughtful ways to difficult situations in your life, instead of merely reacting to them unconsciously. As a result, you experience much less conflict in your life. Alright, I'm at a new section here. Let me double check and see how much left there is. Quite a bit. Quite a bit still. My leg is actually in pain right now. I don't know. It fell asleep and now it like just hurts. Let me shake it off. Some very unusual. This is a very unusual thing for me to do in a video. I just don't want to have like a blood clot or something. Gotta make sure I move. Okay. Yeah, I think we'll go a little bit longer here. Because I really want to try and just split this up into 2 parts. I feel like 3 would be too much. But, yeah, the more that I look, it might have to be 3. Yeah, maybe. Okay. When you stare at death and win the fight. While I was working as a healer for many years, it is still interesting to me the number of ways that trauma can affect people physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, and sometimes affecting every aspect of themselves in their lives. Very often, the person can't figure out what is going on, and their life just continues to spiral out of control. Jonathan was a young man who faced serious and yet rather mysterious symptoms, which sent him looking for answers. Jonathan says he started getting fevers and losing a dramatic amount of weight in April 2013. At first he thought he had picked up a persistent flu. He worked in a busy retail store during the day, and being sick was really hard because he had to stand all day. Then he started to get nosebleeds, and some days his whole body ached. He finally decided to go to the doctor. They ran tests on me for weeks and eventually called me into the private office and gave me the worst news of my life, he recalls. I was diagnosed with chronic lymphocytic leukemia. I don't know why that's so hard to say. I was diagnosed with chronic lymphocytic. So I said it wrong. Lymphocytic leukemia. That day, my whole life fell apart. I was facing the real possibility of dying and dying young. I immediately consented to chemo treatments and radiation therapy. I had to quit my job. There is no describing the emotional and physical pain of the experience. Jonathan says he slipped into a deep depression, and to make matters worse, the medical treatments didn't work. His disease progressed and turned into Richter's syndrome, and at that point he was convinced he was going to die. Desperate to find a solution, he started to look into alternative treatments for cancer. Then, in the fall of that same year, he was listening to a morning radio show in his car about natural health. I was giving an interview and talking about how I sometimes work one-on-one with terminally ill clients. Jonathan pulled over to the side of the road and contacted my office to schedule an appointment. When he showed up for the appointment, he fully expected to be a passive participant in the process of healing, as had been the case with the doctors he had been seeing. He was surprised when I explained my approach. Lost my spot. that I wasn't a doctor, and I believed that the precondition of his illness was not physical but emotional. He admits that what I said sounded far-fetched and even radical to him at the time, but but being desperate, he was willing to try anything. So once I met Teal, I began using the completion process in my own life every day. When I started trying it, my mind would hijack me out of the experience, he describes. But after a week, I woke up with the awareness that I was feeling crushing emotional pain. It felt like my heart was broken. I later realized this feeling was grief. From what I had learned from Teal, I was able to be completely present with this feeling, and for the first time in years I started to cry. In fact, I sobbed for over an hour. Jonathan says he suddenly understood that for years he had been carrying around a feeling from childhood that he was being attacked from all angles of his life. He felt like there was no way out, and that he had no support from anyone or any way to handle the obstacles in his life. He also had another common feeling that I often hear about from clients. He described it this way: I had never actually felt safe in my life. The places I should have found safety, such as my home, were places of hostility, blame, and abuse. I always felt invaded by the harshness of the world itself. I had to grow up too quickly, with no support in this hostile world. Once Jonathan learned how to really be with his old feelings, he was able to heal the buried wounds and the grief within himself. It was not long before he started feeling a sense of relief and resolve, having faced these old emotions. I was able to provide my inner child and my heart with the things I did not get as a child, and as a result, the world started to feel safer, Jonathan recalls. I even found a best friend during the process who moved into an apartment with me, and some days I even enjoyed my life. I actually forgot about dying for an hour at a time. I was feeling complete. So I figured that if it was my time to die, I was prepared to trust that I could face that. Jonathan could have concluded his comments there, but he continued. Here's the best part. I went in to the doctors after months of doing the process, and they told me that my cancer was in remission. I feel that it wasn't the chemo that did it, nor the radiation or any other doctor or person who cured me. It was me that cured myself. I truly believe that I cured myself by actually facing the root of the pain I had been carrying for years, and by waking up both spiritually and emotionally. My cancer has been in complete remission for just over a year now. This has not been an easy process, but I have to come to realize that true healing is rarely an easy process. Experiencing the freedom of peace. I am sharing these stories to give you an appreciation of what you can gain from the completion process part of your life. One of the first things you may notice is the potential for experiencing peace. Like forgiveness, peace cannot be forced. You cannot just decide to be peaceful because it isn't something that you do, but rather it is something that organically occurs within you in response to your healing. You might not be aware of it, but peace is not a purely positive state. It's a state that transcends opposites. Peace actually transcends both the positive and the negative. Many people look at an enlightened person and assume that the enlightened person feels positive emotions all the time, and that is why he or she behaves that way. The truth is that an enlightened person has made a practice of releasing all resistance from his or her being. It's not that they never experience conflict or pain. It's that they are willing to be open to experiencing conflict and pain. Once you become willing to feel, you no longer resist conflict or pain, and you'll no longer fear the future. You'll become so open to experiencing all things in life that you won't resist any experiences. In the absence of resistance, you will find peace. In this way, true and lasting peace isn't the result of no longer experiencing conflict. It's a result of embracing all experiences, whether they involve conflict or not. Peace works on the assumption that there is value to negative experiences and also value to positive experiences, and that these two states need each other to exist. Peace is a level of freedom that most people never experience in their life, but peace is always available to you. Hmm. It's a very interesting take on peace. I kind of have my own gripes with this, but I think this is it's food for thought for sure, something to think about. Overcoming barriers in career and life. You have now heard two client stories that are dramatic, so you might wonder, are they all that way? What other good things can come out of the completion process? Here's a case where Isaac, a man in his early 30s, found that the completion process helped him secure financing for a venture after years of having difficulty closing such deals. In 2013, Isaac was trying hard but not succeeding to raise a lot of money for his company. He seemed to have a number of investors interested in his business, all ready to invest, but every time at the last minute they'd change their minds, and he wouldn't get the funding. He wondered if he was cursed or something, so he reached out to me to consult about my business and how he could overcome the blocks he was feeling. It was during these consolations that I told Isaac about the completion process, and he started to use it on himself. He soon realized that he struggled with a number of patterns around money, and he began to understand the root of this issue. I was neglected as a child, and as a result, I had the subconscious belief that my needs could not be met by others, and that I had to do everything on my own, he describes. I would attract interest in my company through my passion, expertise, and persistence, but then my emotional wounds from childhood would sabotage all of my fundraising efforts. The awareness of this helped him to understand that his most important desire was to be loved, and that making lots of money was the main way he was trying to get love. He kept on creating an environment of scarcity at his company, but slowly he began to see why he did this. I think I was subconsciously proving to myself that my employees stuck around because they truly loved me, he recalls. After all, they could not possibly stay because I liked the daily struggles we were under, and since I could only pay them a salary that was under market level, I figured they must be sticking around for one reason: they loved me. As he continued to use the completion process, he learned how to change his thinking, and he learned how important it is to connect with how he felt. He started to engage in activities that felt good rather than thinking he had to keep struggling all the time. As he put his new realizations to good use, he soon found that he could not only attract amazing opportunities and outcomes into his business life, but he could also seal those deals. Isaac sums it up in business terms. Once I broke down the blocks and embraced my emotions, I found a renewed passion in my business, closing $1.5 million in funding. We are projected to surpass $7 million in revenue this year. As I have continued to watch Isaac's success roar, I am so happy he's finally living his dreams. Finding your true purpose. Many good things happen when Isaac embraced the completion process, and you can enhance your life in similar ways. Facing and resolving your emotions is an excellent way to help yourself become more authentic. When you do, you will have greater access to what truly brings you joy, and you will discover the gifts that you came to this life to give to the world. This might be a new concept to you, but I believe that our life's purpose always comes in the form of what we are meant to give this world. As children, we were not disconnected from what brought us joy and what we were good at. We did those things naturally. In that way, we were closer to our purpose as children than we were as adults. By integrating our fractured childhood aspects the way Isaac was finally able to do, we regain access to these natural aspects of ourselves. Rediscovering what it is that we want to do with our lives, we find our passion. You'll also see that Isaac became even more passionate and creative in his drive to advance his company. He felt renewed energy, which is a normal outcome of the completion process. Whenever we reintegrate aspects of ourselves that we had rejected and therefore suppressed, we begin to feel the urge to create. As we become more authentic, we gain access to the gifts we have come into this life with, and our creativity naturally skyrockets to help us achieve goals. Alright, let me do a quick check here. Okay. I think we reached a pretty good stopping point here. I'm thinking the next video will probably be about the same length. Let's see, how much time do I have here? Yeah, I think this is a pretty good stopping point. Actually, one second. Yeah, I'm gonna go one more section here. So yeah, we'll just complete this section, then I'll end it off. Living a high stress life while flying high. People who have aspects of their work that are completely out of... Sorry, let me reread that. People who have aspects of their work that are completely out of their control are often under intense stress. They have to be ready for anything at a moment's notice. Airline pilots would be an example of a job where you have to account for a wide range of variables, such as weather, unruly passengers, airplane maintenance issues, fluctuating schedules, and the safety of everyone on board, just to name a few. I worked with a man who had to face all these things on any given workday and still deal with his own personal emotion and physical health. I'm amazed by the resilience of such high-stress workers, and I would like to share the story of William, who was able to resolve some long-standing personal challenges through the completion process. William worked as a flight captain for certain commercial passenger flights for more than 20 years before I met him. He really enjoyed this job because he loved the interconnection between technical things and the human teamwork part of the job. He didn't mind the pace and especially enjoyed the phases of high workload when he had first started, but his early years in life were not nearly as enjoyable. During my childhood, I was very lonely and lost, William shared with me. My parents were extreme Christians, so enjoying life was simply not acceptable. I could not listen to non-Christian music, go dancing, play basketball, or have a girlfriend. Therefore, when I was growing up, my core belief was, if I was happy, God would punish me for that. This left me with a feeling of being wrong. Williams said that he struggled with this as an adult and participated in 300 hours of psychoanalysis to try and overcome this underlying feeling. He became an avid reader of self-help books on love, relationships, depression, and similar topics, but still he suffered with apathy, extreme shame, perfectionism, suppressed anger, and separateness. He couldn't seem to break free of any of it, and says eventually he became hypocritical of himself 24 hours a day. In essence, he treated himself the same way his parents treated him when he was a child. Despite his outward career success as a pilot, Williams still kept a complete check on his emotions, controlling them at all times so he would not have to feel them. Finally, things came to a head for him. Like many clients I see, he developed physical symptoms. This is how he describes one of his lowest points. Following years of not enjoying my life, I got an extreme illness that I almost died from, William admits. When this was combined with separating from my wife, I was left feeling completely hopeless. When he found the completion process, he remembers being surprised to hear that his thoughts could manifest in his body. He had always thought it was the other way around, but through the completion process he discovered the reason for his apathy, self-hatred, and perfectionism. I saw clearly that neither the good nor the bad emotions were allowed in my childhood, William explains. My father was quite often in a rage, so I never wanted to be that way. When I began to allow myself to feel and express my emotions for the first time, it was a highly visceral experience. I dove deep into the feelings and faced my deep childhood wounds. A few times it felt like dying. My body was shaking. When I experienced triggers, I fully went into that emotion where I discovered and was unconditionally there for my inner child. William says that what helped him the most was to change the circumstances within the memory so that it finally felt resolved. He admits that relief wasn't instantaneous, but it didn't actually take that long before he started to feel transformed. This is how he describes the process in his own words. Looking at the deep wounds inside myself did not cause me to feel instantly great. First, it forced me to go completely in the direction of surrendering to what is, and that was really hard. But every time I did this process, it felt like the anchor was lifting. It slowly started to change my life. Now William says he finally knows how he wants a relationship to feel. I want it to feel warm and fluffy, and that's what I'm going for. Since committing to this process, I have been getting more honest and real, both with myself and with others. I've learned that I am where I am, and this comforts me. Throughout his life, William thought that he would have to change himself completely to be worthy and to be loved. But now that he has learned to face his emotions rather than bury them, he knows that it's the other way around. Learning to unconditionally love himself just as he is right now is the answer. I feel like I have really changed my life from the roots, William says in conclusion. I still have more work to do, but my relationships have changed dramatically. The more I love myself, the more I can take in the love of others. I finally understand at a soul level that love is not love when it hurts. More and more, I find peace in myself and do not have to search for it in the outside world. Alright, and that's where we'll leave off for part 3. What was the name again of this chapter? Well, not the chapter name. This is actually the, well, this is part 3 of the book, but the chapter was life-changing impact of the completion process, and reconciliation is the part of the book that we're in, the final part of the book. So we'll pick up the remainder of chapter 9 in the next reading, which will come after the next Kybalion reading, which is next. We probably got maybe a little less, but it'll probably be the same length in terms of video time for this part 2, so it's going to be another long one. And then we'll be at just about the end of the book. So, yeah, that was a lot to take in there. Her whole definition of peace is very interesting to me. I'm probably going to have to reread that and think about that a little bit. Not quite sure if I agree with that 100%, but it is definitely some food for thought. But anyway, if you guys enjoyed the reading, make sure you drop a like on the video. Feel free to comment if you feel the need to do so. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please consider subscribing, hitting the bell so you can stay up to date on all the future readings to drop on the channel. Once we're done with these books, we'll be probably starting another one. I don't know if I'll do 2 at a time again. Not really sure. I'll have to think about it. But there will be other content coming soon as well, so stay tuned for that. But otherwise, thank you for watching. Thank you for your energy, and I'll see you guys in the next video very soon. Take care.